Okay, so welcome to Storytime. Okay. I'm telling the story of how I used to be a staunch atheist and kind of the journey that I was thrust into to exit that worldview that I was very attached to. And so I'm telling the story of my former life as an atheist and what happened to kind of shift me into the place where I'm at now, which is not just spiritual, but religious. Okay. But also, just so you all know, at certain points in this talk, I'm going to be bringing up the kind of like the conditions of my childhood, which involved a lot of emotional abuse. And so just want to name that. If you're not feeling resourced to hear about that, you can leave. And if you're listening to this later, just be aware of that going into this. I'm not going into huge detail, but sometimes we just don't want to hear about stuff. So this is how I want to begin today. And I'm going to return to this idea later, but I just want to kind of plant this seed early. So our beliefs, the beliefs that we hold, do not come from nowhere. And sometimes it can seem like our beliefs are like monolithic, like they just are the way that they are and in this unchanging way. But 100% of the beliefs that we have are the result of something. Whether it's our personal life, our family life, our religious upbringing, or our cultural realities, right? And so our beliefs always come from somewhere. And this concept alone has gifted me with a lot of compassion for my past selves, because I actually love atheist me, like past me who is an atheist. I love her. And she was doing it right, actually. It all makes so much sense. Because past me, atheist, was not for no reason. Given everything I had ever experienced, of course I felt the way that I did. Everything younger me did was so intelligent, actually, because even in my kind of like seemingly unintelligent behaviors, in every single moment, something new was trying to be born. Okay, and I'm going to say more about this later. There's a creative impulse behind every action. And I was trying to give birth to a new reality, even when I was an atheist. But we'll return to this. So I'm going to tell you my story. Okay. So a really important element of my story is my mom. She's a main character. And like all parents, consciously or unconsciously, she constructed my belief system. And so something about my mom that contributed to my original path as an atheist was the fact that she was incredibly cruel. My mom told me that I was an idiot every chance that she could. And looking back, this is how she was able to kind of keep her thumb on me, because she was uncomfortable with the fact that I was actually like a separate human being from her, but that's like a whole nother story. But the fact of the matter is that I had a parent who relished in telling me that I was stupid. Okay. And so that's major. One of the wildest memories that I have was when I was driving with her in Sweden when I was about 11 years old. And we were trying to get to my uncle's house. And we got lost in the car. And somehow I managed to figure out how to get to this destination just by like looking at the map. And I will never forget this. It's like seared in my mind. As soon as it became clear that I had found the solution, my mom looked over at me and said, "Wow, I guess you're not a total idiot after all." And in that moment, something shifted. This was when I really started to push back against her. I was about 11 years old. And I began my soul's journey of proving her wrong, because I knew that I wasn't an idiot. I knew that I was smart. And so I took it upon myself to prove it by doing what you think you should do to prove that you're smart. I started learning about stuff. I took an interest in truth. I took an interest in what's real. And the only coherent path towards truth that I had at the time was just like materialist science. And so naturally, I went in that direction because obviously normative Christianity wasn't offering me a sophisticated and coherent explaining story for reality. Okay. Science was my only choice. And through that understanding, it was natural for me to kind of come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist, because that entire concept doesn't fit neatly into that particular system of knowledge. And so atheism also helped me with my confidence, because there's actually a quality of confidence that comes with this like new atheism thing. You really believe that you're right about something and it feels good, right? Like I said last week, it feels really good to be right. And so I counteracted the tyranny of being raised by somebody who loved to tell me I was stupid by adopting an atheistic worldview that made me feel more confident in my intelligence, okay? And I was at times almost belligerent in this confidence that I found in this worldview. I grew up in a town right outside of Philly, and the house that I grew up in was within like 700 feet of 3 churches. And every summer, all 3 of these churches would do different vacation Bible schools. And I would go because all of my friends did, and it was also free. Okay. So that was like a no-brainer. And so I remember one time at the Presbyterian camp, there was one morning when the pastor was like giving the morning sermon or something, and he started saying something like, okay, kids, what would you do if you had a friend who told you that they don't believe in God? And then with like an unhinged amount of confidence, I raised my hand and I was like, I don't believe in God. Like I actually did that. I blacked out afterwards. I don't know what happened afterwards, but I did that, okay? Because atheism made me very confident. It was the antidote to my mother. And because of this, my atheism was incredibly intelligent. And so as I got older, though, I made it my entire personality. Okay. I had this whole personality. I always have to have the freshest take, like the hottest take. I was always the smart friend. People would always come to me to get my opinion on something. Right. And so, you know, because of my mom, I tried so hard to prove that I wasn't an idiot that I actually kind of did become smart. Okay. And I was always navigating the experience of gaining intelligence from a limited place, right? And this limited place was this materialist scientific lens. And of course, like I said, that's all that I knew. Because normative Christianity, for instance, is completely insulting to most people's intelligence. Like, how are we not supposed to find the idea of the devil hiding dinosaur bones to be like not a joke or something, right? It's insulting. It's literally insulting. And this is why people, anyway, but you know, unless you meet a real mystic, you'll always just assume that all organized religion is as shallow and incoherent as Christianity, right? Like this makes total sense why people feel this way. So material science gave me answers that didn't insult my already hurting intelligence. And I kept going with it until I started having experiences, okay? And so I went to college right after high school in Southern California. And my first roommate situation, like out of the home, was a shared 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other girls, okay, who jammed like sardines. And all of them grew up Christian and were believers, okay? And so because I was such an insufferably confident new atheist, I kind of made it my mission to prove them wrong. Okay, I'm just being honest when I'm looking back on my behavior. I was a total atheist evangelist evangelizing against Christian evangelism. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, but like, that's just what I was doing. Okay. There was something going on. And so I remember one night, a couple of months into living with these girls, I was just laying in bed at the end of the day, listening to like some YouTube interview with a bunch of white male new atheists. And these guys are just like droning on and on and on about like rationalism or something. And then all of a sudden, something happened. And I was laying in bed and something shifted in my perception. I started having an experience of experiencing, okay? And I remember I was like in bed, I can picture it, I could like see into my closet, and I kept having this thought like, is this really happening? Like I was almost like paralyzed. I was like, damn, I was like, life is like actually happening. And that sounds really stupid, but this is like a thing, okay? And all of a sudden, I started spiraling into this weird, like non-ordinary state in which I was detachedly witnessing my experience in bed, okay? It's a very specific and weird feeling. And I had actually experienced that feeling before. That wasn't new. I had loads of experiencing the experiences when I was a kid. Now, someone hearing me speak about this who's situated in like a purely psychological lens would say that I was dissociating, okay? I do not think that's what was happening at all, actually. What I realize now, looking back on it, was that I was actually taking like sips of what we call in the yogic tradition, witness consciousness, which is the yogic ability to kind of step back from what's happening and witness it with a level of detachment. But the thing that made this experience of the experience different than what had ever happened before was what happened afterwards. And so I don't know how much time elapsed during this particular episode, but in the hours afterward, I was filled with complete clarity and bliss. I had never had that experience before. And I remember me and one of my roommates later that night got in the car and went to some like curry restaurant. And I was like speaking with like all of this eloquence when we were in the car. And I had like never experienced that level of lucidity before. I can like remember it so clearly, being like, oh my God, I was like in a different state. Something changed. And on some level, when I look back, I can see that that experience planted a seed. And that seed kind of startled the false integrity of my materialist worldview. And so within a few months of that night, when that happened, I separately had this like environmental awakening, which is a story for another day. And because of that, I decided to drop out of college to pursue farming, basically. And so I had citizenship in Sweden. So I used the remainder of my student loan money from that year to buy a plane ticket to Stockholm. And I interned on a couple of farms. And I remember like, I was like only eating peanut butter and jelly bagels for months before that trip so that I could save money. I like, my digestive system is like cringing thinking about that, but I did what needed to be done. Okay. My experience of the experience may have planted a seed, but my foray into agriculture is what watered the seed, okay? And the seed was exactly it. It was like the literal existence of seeds alone shook me, right? And so I didn't grow up in nature, really. There were woods near my house, but I never had a huge interest in nature, aside from like viewing the woods as like a good place to smoke weed. So farming was truly my first immersion into the mysteries of the natural world. And I remember just feeling mind blown by seeds, okay? And so the first time, I saw a seed germinating in a tray, it was like something broke in my brain. Like something broke. And I was like, how the fuck does a whole ass tomato plant live inside of this tiny thing? And I was aware of the fact that there's a materialist scientific explanation for that. I was aware of that. But for some reason, all of a sudden, it didn't feel like enough of an explanation. And I view this as like the beginning of my like questioning era. I was in my like questioning era, okay? Like the fact that a California redwood tree, the biggest tree on earth, lives inside of a 1 centimeter seed, that thought acted as a crack in the dam of my understanding, okay? And all of a sudden, the wall of my knowledge had like a crack in it. And as the months progressed in my new farming reality, the crack started to kind of spread, okay? At the very end of this trip overseas, I ended up in Scotland, where I was working in like an old kitchen garden on the grounds of a castle. It was literally a castle. And this place in Scotland is where the structural integrity of my dam really started to deteriorate, because 2 really major things happened. 1, I was humbled by the intelligence of nature in a big way. And 2, I started having like mystical paranormal experiences that I was unable to explain. And so first I'll address the intelligence of nature. The guy I was learning from in the kitchen garden was a permaculture practitioner. And so like nutshell explanation of permaculture. Permaculture mimics the intelligent systems of nature in the controlled environment of like a garden. And it's quite prolific if you do it right. But I had never been exposed to like ecological ways of thinking before. And it had like a really profound effect on me. And so I had a lot of time to myself during this trip, because it was literally like me and a couple of other guys in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. And I was also like 19 years old. So I would just go on nature walks like every day by myself. And it was so gorgeous. This was one of the most beautiful places I've still ever been in my life. And I remember one day, I can still picture the trail. I know exactly where I was. I was on a walk and I thought to myself, everything is arranged so perfectly. All of the bushes are growing in just like the right place. The canopy of the trees are just so perfectly aligned. And the color of the scrub and the understory and the leaves, all of it is just so perfect, as if an artist had composed the scene. And then another crack started to appear in the wall of my dam. And I began to really think to myself, this cannot just be a mistake. There's no way that this is a mistake. This cannot just be the result of random genetic mutations, right? It's too perfect. But this is where things started to really shift, because it wasn't just too perfect, it was too intelligent. It was too alive. Maybe there is an artist, a cosmic artist, who is drawing all of this on some level of reality. And so years later, I was able to kind of put this phenomena into words, because when I was driving around Colorado, it was a beautiful day. And I remember thinking to myself, nature arranges herself in perfect compositions to remind us that we are being done. Nature arranges herself in perfect compositions to remind us that we are being done, okay? And so everything is trying to wake us up is a spiritual tenet of mine. And what God is trying to wake us up to is the phenomena of the perfection of nature, okay? And in this phenomena is the fact that all of this is actually arranged by divine providence. And nature tells us that every time we go on a hike. And because of this, beauty and especially beauty found in nature, is actually a force of spiritual awakening, right? But I'm going to return to the story. So that happened. Okay, so I'm having my nature arranges herself awakening in Scotland. And then I started having paranormal experiences and things just started getting crazy. And so this castle compound where I was living was like a retreat center. And there were all kinds of events happening when I was staying there. And I was living in a trailer like behind the castle. And there was like this building kind of next to my trailer where there was an immersion happening for people who had experienced like really extreme trauma, like some sort of like professional, like somatic release retreat for traumatized people. And as the days passed, when I was staying in the trailer next to the trauma retreat, I started to have like weird experiences, and I would go to sleep at night and I would hear voices, but it was very faint. It was as if they were kind of happening behind a closed door in my mind. It was like muffled, but the voices were very unsettling. Okay. They were the voices of people in extreme distress. They were like the voices of people who were suffering. And it was very disturbing for me. I literally could not sleep. Like I would put pillows over my head to make the sound go away, but nothing would work. And so eventually I talked about this experience with another woman who worked on staff in this retreat center. And she suggested that maybe the people in the trauma retreat were like shedding their wounds and letting go of their past, and their emotional pain was purging from their body, but it had nowhere to go. So it's like the experiences of the people were being processed, but the signature of the emotions didn't quite have anywhere to go. They were just kind of floating around like spirits or something. This is what she says. She said this to me, and it blew my mind. I had never thought of this in any way. I had never occurred to me that that was possible. And so I'm just like listening to her and I'm like, how is that possible? I'm like, what do you mean our feelings have nowhere to go? I thought feelings could only exist in the mind because feelings originate in the mind. So how could something that originates in my mind exist anywhere but my mind? And then the dam started really cracking open. And so when I got back to America, my anthroposophist aunt, who I've talked about a lot in different spaces, suggested that I go to the Rudolf Steiner College in England to kind of pursue my interest in farming. And this is where the whole thing came tumbling down, like violently. I could give a whole other talk like just about Rudolf Steiner, but it's really important to know that his whole thing in the early 20th century was pointing out the limits of a purely materialist view of reality. That was like his whole thick contribution to the 20th century. It's like really important. And when I was in the classroom at this Steiner college, I encountered people who were very vocally questioning materialist science. And I remember, I will never forget, it like raised my hackles. I was like, where the fuck am I? I was like, how the fuck did I end up here? I felt like I was like at like a climate change denial conference all of a sudden. And I was like scared because I'm not about to act like science denial isn't a problem. Okay. That's very dangerous. Okay. But you know, this was my initiation into paradox. This was my initiation into nuance, into kind of more subtle ways of experiencing and explaining reality. So I kind of had to become friends with the experience of breaking down my black and white thinking about reality. My grip on this black and white thing had to start kind of loosening. Because now I know, questioning the episteme of science doesn't mean you're some sort of quack, okay? And this became clear when I met another teacher at this school who taught me about a topic known as plant and animal phenomenology. I should just do a whole talk about it. It's amazing. But during class one day, he told us, singed into my mind forever, he says, nothing in the world is free from epistemological consideration. And so epistemology is the study of how we come to know something to be true. So nothing in the world is free from epistemological consideration. And so every method of knowing, whether it's scientific or spiritual, can and should be subject to ongoing questioning or refinement, okay? And these are words that I still live by. And this guy, Jonathan Code, who taught me about this whole topic, completely changed the course of my life. This was like my turning point. And so he was the one who finally like tore down the wall of my dam of knowledge. And I am so grateful for him. And so basically from like that point on, I began to take spirituality seriously because it really started to show me, okay, this is a different way of understanding what's real. And suddenly I was given a key to a new room of experience. And this room is the room of subtlety. It's the room of the numinous. And I held this key in my hand for many years, and I would lock and unlock its door as I would navigate my spirituality on my own for years after this experience. But during this time in England, I read How to Know Higher Worlds, which is Rudolf Steiner's most famous book. And in the very first chapter, he says that it's basically necessary and unavoidable to find a teacher, like a spiritual teacher, on the path of occultism. And because I was receptive to this kind of new realm of experience, this room of experience, I just remembered that and I took note of it, right? I was like, okay, noted, right? And it made sense at the time because, I mean, after all, Jonathan Code, in his own way, was a spiritual teacher who permanently altered my sense of how reality is, right? So it's not like I didn't see the value in learning from other people. I just didn't really know what to look for. I didn't know who this teacher that Rudolf Steiner was saying I should have should be, right? And so for reference, this was in 2011, okay? And so in 2015, I met my guru. But in the years prior to meeting him, there's like this weird space. I kind of just took like a totally normal and intelligent, like fuck around and find out approach to spirituality, where I would just try shit and just read about stuff. And so I was always building like little altars in my room, like that would be like for nature or like honoring the 4 elements. Okay. I just had this like impulse towards that. And even when I lived in the wilderness in southern Utah, I remember building this like rudimentary shrine of like dead animals that I'd find in the canyons. And sometimes I'd wake up in the night to the sound of people stomping around my tent. Ooh, it gives me the chills, but it wasn't people, it was like spirits. And so during this time, I did everything you normally do when you're just delving into kind of spiritual life. I read the books. I would talk about spiritual things. It became like a new interest for me. And so when I moved to Boulder in 2014, I took a job working at Whole Foods, rolling burritos for college students. And a few months in, I fell in love with a guy who was working in the bakery, who had just moved to the area from California with the ashram that he was a part of. And that's where this whole new chapter began 8 years ago. His guru became my guru. Although the process of accepting the realities of the guru-disciple relationship has been its own dam-breaking process, but I talk more about that in my guru-disciple relationship class. If you want to learn more, I would listen to that. We don't have time today. But this is the moral of my story. The mystic path, the path of mysticism, is not possible without experiences that disrupt our sense of continuity or our beliefs about how we think everything is. And when I say mysticism, I mean the path of navigating ourselves into direct experiences of God, direct experiences of the artist who is painting the incomprehensibly intelligent arrangement of nature, okay? And it is literally impossible to initiate into mysticism without experiences that shatter your sense of reality, that knock you over and lead you to ask deeper questions, that crack the walls of the dam of your belief system until finally the whole thing comes tumbling down, basically. So without being humbled by the mystery, our knowledge of the mystery will actually just keep us bound. We have to be humbled by it. And so people often ask me about faith. Like, what does it mean to have faith? Faith is actually not a belief, it's a process. And so when I look back on the experiences of my life, my faith grew in accordance with the divine process I was inadvertently finding myself in. And so in the middle of certain experiences, like even the experience of the voices in my head in Scotland, I didn't understand what was happening. But as my life went on, I began to kind of take note and see that I was being carried in some sort of a direction. Something was leading me. I was gaining all this evidence. Something kind of had me, almost like I was a marionette doll. And then, suddenly, sometimes through the teachings of other beings, I would receive confirmation of this experience that I was having. Ramakrishna always said, I am the puppet and she is the puppeteer. I am the puppet and she is the puppeteer, God. That statement doesn't make sense unless we learn how to embed ourselves into a life of experiencing. And so, I do not believe in God. I experience her. And that initial experience of experiencing the experience that I had when I lived in California was my initiation into shifting from beliefs to experiences. In every moment, something new is trying to be born. There is a generative impulse behind everything. Even in death, there is life. There's always a generative impulse. A compost pile whispered that to me when I was 19 years old, and I have never been the same since. And when I look back, I was trying to give birth to a new reality, even in the midst of my atheistic impulse, because I wanted to break free from the tyranny of my abusive parent. And so I gave birth to my own identity. And it gave me the confidence that I needed to not be ground down into a pulp in the mire of abuse. Okay. But eventually I had to break free from that too, because I am constantly in a birthing process. It's constant in every single moment. My path from atheism to God has been a constant process of breaking down one dam after another, after another, after another. I break through one, and then, like a comedic trick, God presents me with another dam, okay? But I'm always different on the other side of a new dam. And as time goes on, I've developed a new relationship to this constant process of birthing and dying, birthing and dying. And so I trust the death of my former self. I trust the death of my former self so deeply. What is faith? My faith lives in there. My faith lives in the dying process, because I know that in every moment at the exact same time, something new is trying to be born over and over and over and over again. And so before I wrap up with this sort of story that I hope was helpful, I'd like to end with a message for anyone who's listening to this, of any faith, of any belief system, spiritual, not spiritual, atheist, theist, anything, okay? This is my message for everyone on the planet, okay? If our knowledge or understanding of reality or how we think the world isn't having a meaningful and beneficial effect on our conduct and our behavior as human beings, it is literally meaningless. That is meaningless knowledge. Because if the knowledge that we are gaining is not making us better people, better stewards of reality, better participants in the evolutionary process, it's just another ego, guys. It's just another thing for our mind to cling to. It's just another identity that isn't making us any better. And so I learned a long time ago that I'm not so interested in the details of a belief system. I'm interested in the outcome of a belief system. I'm interested in what happens when somebody embeds themselves in a belief system. Does it make themselves better or not? And I've met a lot of new atheists, myself included, who feel very confident in their belief system, but they're not good people. They're not like, thinking about the fact that the things that they do might have an effect on the entire web of life. Because if you really realize that the way that you respond to a situation has an effect on all sentient beings, that changes the way you stand. And spirituality has actually taught me how to stand. Spirituality has taught me how to stand on the earth. Because the ethical frameworks of spirituality come after faith. They come after God. And the problem with a Western ontology is that we have ethics coming before consciousness. That's not right. And so if your knowledge of spirituality or your knowledge of reality isn't making you a better, more refined person, then it's meaningless. And it's a waste of time. And that's something that I really, really, really was humbled by in my own process, is that just being right doesn't mean anything. Because I made it my whole mission, my whole personality to prove perfectly fine God-believing people wrong. What's the fucking point of that? And so, that's my story. That's my story. What time is it? Oh, wow. 40 minutes. I really went off. I knew it was going to go longer. Does anyone have, I just yelled at everyone for 40 minutes. Does anyone have a thought or question? You can write in the chat or you can come off of mic. Any comments? You don't have to. We can just think about our lives, That was a good experience for me, at the very least, to kind of remember all of that stuff. It's good to take stock of how far we've come. Sometimes. Thank you, Violet. Thank you for being here. Well, if no one has anything, you can go ahead and we'll go on with our lives. I hope that, someone says, my partner is an atheist with a similar story with his mother, and I think he will love this. Oh, okay. You have to, if he listens to it, I want you to DM me and just tell me what happens. I need to know. Okay. I need to know. Good. Thank you. Well, I think we'll just move on. I hope my story was somehow resonant or beneficial or got you thinking a little bit. And I'll be back next week. Probably going to be talking about belief systems again next week. I can feel it. It's simmering in my being. I want to talk about belief systems. And so that's it. So thank you all so much for coming. It's nice to see you. Bye, Ruby. I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Okay, bye.